my name is Blake, if we haven't met, and I'm one of the owners of the Bee Supply. And I am, like I said, in Southern California today. And so that's why I am streaming from the back seat of a pickup truck. So James and Sherry are going to be doing some of the presentation tonight, thank goodness, because in case I lose PowerPoint presentation abilities, but so far so good. So Sherry, give us an overview of the monthly magazine and what we can look forward to in this issue.
I will do that. I will do that. Just so you know, Blake, somebody mentioned that YouTube Live is not running. So that might be where your music's coming from, because that's where it was a problem for me.
Yeah, that
Just
is where it was coming from. So
yep.
while you're doing your thing, I'm gonna try to get the YouTube Live back on and see if I don't have
All
that
right.
echo
All right.
problem
I'll
this
have
time.
you. Yep. In a second, you flip a slide, I'll tell you. All right, y'all.
Beautiful.
It's December. Can you believe it? Can you believe that we're in the last month of the year? Where did this year go? I mean, it's just gone. So this is our Christmas issue, and is that the most beautiful purple picture you've ever seen? And that is a recent photo by Chip Calhoun and his lovely wife, Annalisa, that we know very well. Anyway, gorgeous photo. This issue is full of Christmas, and I just love that. And y'all got to know that it's kind of tough for me because I'm doing this when I'm building magazines in advance. So that means that I'm building this when it was 100 degrees outside. So the fact that I can pull off being Christmas when it's the end of October is pretty cool. I mean, really, when you think about it. But the first article in the book, I'm kind of proud of. It's the Yellow Jacket Christmas. And those of you who have read a December issue, if you go back a few years, I think actually the first year of the magazine, I wrote this article, and it's a feel good, but it answers a lot of questions that a lot of beekeepers on social media have been asking lately, and that's about yellow jackets invading our bees. So I went ahead and pushed this in again, and it's got a really, I think it's a sweet little poem about Christmas. Go in and read it. Also, y'all need to get on page 4 and 5 of this issue and pull up, see what all of the beautiful faces of TBS. We have our Christmas tree in there, and all of the employees, our staff, our team members are in there, and we love them all dearly, and they love y'all. So please go in there, put a face to those people that you get to deal with every day. Real quick, so overcoming winter issues. In there, hive check temperature guide, super helpful for those that aren't familiar. Should I insulate? Boy, that's a hot topic. And 2 articles that I wrote about. I found a dead hive, and it's broken in. It's one article split in 2. So go in and find that. Who out there is part of the Beak Squad? You know who that is? David Burns. I got to interview him, and it turned out great. So go in and look at that as well. And our favorite Lynn Jones, she wrote Honey Gifts Made from the Heart. And this is it was a great article, several, and I made print where you can print them for Christmas gifts. So, okay, Blake, if you'll switch to the next slide, if you can do that while you're doing everything else, I would appreciate it. James is working over here very furiously, answering y'all's questions. Okay, so I picked pros and cons of the different kinds of hives, and I'll tell you, it's kind of interesting. So when James and I first started beekeeping, we thought this is a picture from our bee yard, even though Blake wrote this article. I don't even know that I gave him credit. Look, I didn't even give him credit. Well, Blake wrote the article. Just don't tell him I didn't give him credit. Anyway, it just was super cool to think we could do top bar. And we tried, but we hadn't really figured out Langstroth yet. So this article, I want to read the very first paragraph. You can see right there. We're often led to keep bees in a particular hive style based on who we are exposed to when we start beekeeping. But knowing the options can either solidify your choice or open doors to methods better suited for you, which is where we were. So I will go into just a brief description of where I believe, and Blake, from this article kind of leads you to the Langstroth hive. He starts off, there's multiple kinds, but he actually talks about 3: Langstroth, top bar, or maybe 4. and Apimaye and Warre. So that's 4 different hives. And Langstroth is the absolute, it's the longest one. Let's see, let's say over 150 years that Langstroth's been around. It's the most common. And I think that most all of us, if we've not had exposure to it, if you've watched our webinar for the last 3 years, you have for sure. Read about the Langstroth hive and then compare it, come down the pros and cons of that. Go to the Apimaye next. Apimaye is a super cool hive. That's on our wish list for Christmas. We've kind of got some plans to put some of those in our bee yard. They're the Cadillac of hives, but they're insulated from heat and cold. So that's super cool. Pros and cons about that. Top bar hives, which that picture is, it's just to me, that is a super cool way of doing oldest method of beekeeping in the world. I mean, that's interesting, right? Just to be able to do that and keep your bees in something that's from generations forever back, right? Then the last one's Warre hive, and that is how you pronounce it, and anyone new to the word, and when you get to the article. Warre hive it's basically building from the top down, which to me seems backwards, but the bees get it. And there's pros and cons about that type of beekeeping as well. But go in, read it, see what, fits you. And once you get to a comfortable spot in your beekeeping, it may be something you want to jump into, one of those different types. All right, Blake, did I give you enough time to get things squared away?
Sherry, that was amazing. Thank you. You gave me just enough time to. Um, in the intro, I was hearing this crazy echo, and then the music was playing in the background, and so thank you. That was just enough time. I was sitting there Googling how to get rid of the echo in a Zoom call. So perfect timing. I think I got it figured out. Um, what I was distractedly trying to tell you in the intro was, I'm at the American Honey Producers Association meeting, and it's a pretty interesting group because there's only about 100 to 150 people that attend this conference, and yet they represent over 50% of the entire U.S. bee population. So not a lot of people here, but some of the biggest, most influential beekeepers in the nation come to this meeting. So it's a fun one. Anybody's welcome to come. So if you're ever really interested in getting into beekeeping on a larger scale, the American Honey Producers Association or the American Beekeeping Federation, they're both great options to learn what's going on in the industry in a little bit of a bigger, bigger way. So super cool meetings. And I've talked so much this week that I'm kind of losing my voice. So you'll have to forgive me. Okay, so as we jump in tonight, quick reminder, you can still do pre-orders now for 2024. All of our bees are available. Our packages, nooks, single-story hives are all available for pre-order. They are selling quickly as always. So if you are interested in getting into beekeeping, I highly, highly recommend getting your orders in now. So that you can get the breed of bee that you want, and the date that you want, and the price that you want. Oftentimes pricing goes up in the new year. So definitely the time to get that done. So a lot of my bees right now are actually stored indoors in these overwintering sheds is what we call it in Idaho. I do have some bees overwintered outdoors in Texas, and then I have some bees overwintered outdoors in California, which is where I'll be heading tonight, actually, is to go look at some of our bees here in California. But then a lot of our bees are also stored indoors in sheds in Idaho. And the super cool thing about this is these sheds hold the bees right at 43 degrees all winter long, which is the ideal hibernation temperature for bees. They only eat about 12 to 15 pounds of honey throughout the entire winter. When we overwinter outdoors, bees are eating 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds over the winter, depending on where you are. In these sheds, the temperatures are so stable and the conditions so perfect that they only eat 12 to 15 pounds. Their metabolism is just dialed in perfectly because they're not clustering more tightly when it gets really cold, and then clustering and then loosening the cluster when it gets warm. They're just able to have a light cluster all winter long. And so it's so good for the bees. They just don't decline in strength over the winter. And yet they completely shut down from a brood rearing perspective, which means that the queen gets a 3 to 4 month break. We have these bees in our sheds for almost 4 months. It's from early October through mid January. So the queen shuts down, she gets a break, which means she lives longer and is able to lay eggs longer. Our equipment is stored indoors for 4 months, so it's not getting rained on and rotting. And then the bees don't eat as much honey, and we don't lose as many beehives because they're not outdoors in the extreme conditions. So pretty cool. Something we've been doing for 5 or 6 years now, and it's worked great, great, great for our business. So these are just some pictures of where our bees are hanging out right now. Okay, so let's jump into the bee yard, and I shoot me a message if there's a huge lag or I anything. I think this will stream okay. I've got a pretty decent cell signal where I am right now, so I think it'll stream just fine. But if it gets really wonky, then feel free to shoot me a note, and we have a backup. Sherry, as always, Sherry has my back, and she has a copy of this video that she can stream if all else fails. So I'm going to pull up our Yard video, and I'm going to share this, and we will see how it goes. And let's see, get that ready. Here we go, guys. Hey guys, Blake with the Bee Supply here. So this time of year, it's pretty chilly outside. I mean, in Texas, it's been actually warmer than normal, 50s and low 60s some days. But there's not really much going on in the bees. I mean, when we looked at the bees back in November, they were really shutting down nicely. They had plenty of food. They were shutting down for the winter, good bee populations. And we kind of got all of our winter management out of the way back in November. And if you're having to do a lot in your bees in November or in December, that's kind of a problem, right? I mean, they should already have all the food they need. If they don't have the food they need, go back and watch our November video on how to feed hives in the winter months. But right now, we're really just in a holding period. Occasionally I'll go in and check the bee population, but that's about it this time of year, and then do some emergency feeding if needed. We'll cover some more of those tips and tricks in the webinar in a little bit. But one of the biggest things I also see this time of year is people that are checking their hives and the bees are dead, or the bees are gone, or they're queenless and there's only a few bees left. And that's really a symptom of stuff that usually started happening back in July and August. The varroa mites get out of control, or the queen was lost back in the fall. There's a number of symptoms that we'll talk about later tonight when you're diagnosing a hive that's died. But it usually started way back in the summer, and there's not much you can do about it at this point other than save that comb, because the comb is the most valuable piece in all of beekeeping. And so saving that comb to dump a package into or put a new nook into is extremely valuable. Or catch a swarm and install it in that comb, and that new hive grows incredibly quickly. So we'll talk about this more later tonight, but don't be discouraged if you've lost your bees. It's incredibly common. Even people that do this for a living often lose 50% of their hives every year. That comb is what's valuable, and it'll help you get started that much faster next year. But with all that out of the way, I'm not in the bee yard today. So I am actually going to do something I've never done before, which is give you guys a tour of our sister company, Desert Creek Honey. So I'm here at our packing facility. This is the facility where we package honey. This used to be our beekeeping facility too until we outgrew it. So this location here in Blue Ridge was originally built to be 50% packing honey and 50% extracting and harvesting honey. And we did a lot of beekeeping work here too. And then as all the businesses grew, this transitioned to just packing honey. So all we do here now is package honey. We've got some office space here and office space off-site as well. But I'm just going to walk you guys around and give you a quick tour of how we package honey, and then give you a little bit of the history on how we got here. But this is at Desert Creek, and again, it's a sister company of the Bee Supply. So come on in, and I'll give you guys a quick walking tour of Desert Creek Honey. This is our packing company. Now, at some point, I'd love to show you guys our beekeeping facilities too, and I will do that. We've got those about 30 minutes from here, and in California and North Dakota. So come on in. So this used to be our store area. Now this has really transitioned to, most of our store area has moved over to the bee supply. So we don't have a lot going on in here these days. And by the way, special thanks to Brian with TBS. Brian is filming for me today. So thank you, Brian. A lot of you know Brian. He's at a lot of our trade shows. He was a store manager in Blue Ridge for several years. And then now he's our product manager. So he develops new products. So thanks, Brian. Let's take a quick look at the office, and then we'll take a look at the bottling room. So this is Misty's office. Misty is our amazing customer service representative for our packing company. And we transitioned back here into the office area. So this was actually built recently-ish. So about 5 years ago, we actually built this office space. We did it, actually Desert Creek employees, and in our off season, back when we used to just do beekeeping, we would, in the off season, work on building this office space. So we actually built it all, and then it actually finished being built about a month ago. So it was like a 5-year process. We've been in the office for several years, but we actually finally finished it just recently. So this is not much to it. So, but we have office space for various employees in the packing company. My office is in here. This is where I spend a lot of my time when I'm not out in the bee yard. So this is my office space when I'm not out working bees. So I would say my office is half in here and then half out in the bee yard or at our other facilities. So let's take a quick look at the packing room. So where we actually package honey is a fairly small area. A lot of the space is taken up by getting the honey ready to package. So that's the more difficult part. So there's quite a bit going on in here, and then we'll zoom in a minute so you can see each step. But really all that's going on in here is we're getting honey into the bottle. So we're not prepping it in this room. That happens in a different room that I'll show you. But everything in here is just getting the honey ready to get in, or getting the honey into the bottle, getting a lid on the bottle, and getting a label on the bottle. And so come on down to this end, and we'll look at the beginning stage of the process. So by the way, we used to do everything in this room. We used to prep the honey, liquefy the honey, and then bottle the honey. And now we just get the honey into the bottle. But you can see over here at the very beginning stage, we've got the bottles getting set onto a round table. And we'll zoom in a little bit so you can see what's going on. But the bottles are getting put onto that round table. We're doing plastic jars today. And they're being lined up, getting ready to go into the filler. And then the next stage is those 4 nozzles are dropping down, and the honey is being put into those jars. And these are 1-pound jars that we're filling today. But this line can do 12-ounce bears, 1-pound jar, 2-pound jars. It can actually go all the way up to gallon jugs. And so it'll do pretty much any size that we need it to do. And so you can see it fills up 4 at a time on this particular packing line. We actually had a packing line before this that would fill up 2 at a time, and that wasn't fast enough, so it moved up to 4, and now it goes much faster. So the next stage you can see over there is actually the lid is being put on. And so that big blue container that you see, that's getting the lids put on. And so there's a big hopper that all the lids are being fed into. And then the lid is being screwed onto the jar. And then it's actually going under what's called an induction sealer. And so that's, if you ever open up a lid of liquid, usually it has a silver seal on the inside. And that silver seal then is heated and sealed to the top of the plastic jar so that it seals the honey in. So that induction seal is what seals the honey into the jar. If you're a small scale beekeeper, you can often buy seals that are not induction sealed, and so they're called pressure seals. And that's what you would get from TBS, for example. It would be a seal that just seals with pressure, but it doesn't seal nearly as well. And then the final stage is the label is being put on, and that label that's probably the most challenging piece of the whole packing process is getting that label put onto the jar. Our labels are especially difficult because they are kind of an odd shape, and the jar is an odd shape, and so getting that label put on perfectly is no fun at all. But the packing line this newer packing line we just bought does a much better job of getting that label on than the old one did. And so at this angle, you can just see that you can see the jar coming out of the line, and it actually puts a label on both sides at the same time, and then they do a final quality check before it goes into the box to make sure the label's on properly and there aren't any wrinkles or anything else. So definitely a long-term goal of ours. We really need to get a different jar size and a label size, because this one's super hard to get just right because our labels taper down on the sides. But 9 times out of 10, this line gets it just right. So let's go back and take a look at how we actually get the honey ready to be packaged. Packaging is definitely the harder part. We actually used to bottle everything by hand, so you probably can't see it, but on the other side of that piece of cardboard, there's actually 2 hand bottlers. So we used to bottle everything by hand, one stinking jar at a time. And nowadays, of course, we do it in a more automated way. But yeah, for years, up until we were at a few 100,000 pounds a year, we were actually just bottling by hand, one jar at a time, until we got to a point where we just couldn't keep up anymore. But really, I mean, you can do a couple 100,000 pounds a year by hand and be a pretty efficient operation. So yeah, you can do a lot of volume with very, very little actual equipment. So, excuse us, sorry. So back here is where we get everything ready to go into the bottle. So this used to actually be our extracting room. So we used to actually have 2 different automated extracting lines back here, and we would extract all of our honey. But we found that as we grew and as the packing business grew, a bunch of bees back here for extracting honey and packing honey into the bottle didn't mix very well. Every now and then we'd have a bee that found its way into the bottle. And we've never had angry customers about that. We would get customers call and go, hey, there's a bee in my jar. Is that a problem? And we'd be like, nah, it's like peel on the mashed potatoes. It's authentic. But we didn't want that to go on too long, so we actually had to separate it. So we have different beekeeping facilities now where we do all of our bee work, and then we just do packing here. But it used to be a combined facility. But when we get our honey in, so we have storage facilities in North Dakota and others in Dallas where we are storing honey, and we only store about 1 to 2 months worth at a time here on site that we need to use. But when it comes in, most of the time it's solid as a rock. It's 100% granulated. So whether it's in a 3,000 pound tote or a 600 pound barrel, it's solid. I mean, that honey has fully granulated. And so the first step in processing it is we have to warm it up so that it turns back into a liquid so that we can pump it and use it. Because we can't get it out of the container if it's not warmed at least a little bit to be able to pump that honey. And so we built this warmer. So this is actually a whole room where we warm up the honey to about between 100 and 120 degrees. And so we'll fill it with totes of honey or barrels of honey. And then we'll leave them in here for 2 to 3 days, depending on how granulated they are. And then that'll turn it into a liquid. You can see there's some pallets of boxes in here as well. And sometimes we'll get returned honey that's granulated. And so we'll palletize it, and we can actually turn it back into liquid honey in the jar if it granulates in the jar. And so this is just a whole room that we built to liquefy honey much faster than we used to do it. We actually use to heat the honey. We found this years ago. A lot of big operations use propane or natural gas to liquefy honey, and it always made me nervous from a safety standpoint.
So we actually found these electric bed bug heaters. So hotels use these all the time. So if a hotel has a bed bug outbreak, they get these heaters that are only about this big. You saw them in there, they were blue. And they put them inside of a hotel room, and they heat the hotel room up to about 100, between 100 and 140 degrees, and it kills all the bed bugs. But that heater's made to heat a whole room up to about 100 to 140 degrees for 48 hours or so. And that worked perfectly for liquefying honey. And they're pretty cheap too. You know, it's like $500 to $1,000 depending on the unit you buy for this all-encompass heater, and it comes with a fan and everything. And you just plug it in, and it heats the whole room up to the temperature we need. You can adjust this heat setting, but it's perfect for liquefying honey. And so we've used that for years as a really great, safe way to just have a low temperature to where it doesn't hurt the honey, but does liquefy it. We actually used to use, if you look over here, this big black box. This is what we used before we built this. We built this big black insulated box, and then we would put four barrels of honey in it at a time, and we put heat lamps in there, and that would liquefy all the honey. So that's how we used to do it. There's even ways you can shrink it down from there, but that's how we used to do it back in the day before we did the oven. Next, we have, once the honey's all liquid, we bring it over here, and then we dump it into one of these 4 tanks. Each one of these tanks holds several thousand pounds of honey, and we'll fill them full, and we can warm it if we need to. So if we need to, keep it at 100 degrees or so that it doesn't granulate again. But usually it's only sitting in these tanks for a few days as it's waiting to go into the bottling room to pack the honey. And so each one of these will be full. They have a mixer in there. If we need to mix the honey, that helps it further liquefy if it's still a little bit granulated. And then we can run it through another heater. So if it's still a little bit granulated, we can, again, heat it to 120 degrees or so and liquefy it further. And then we can run it through our strainers. And so these just have a very coarse, kind of sweatshirt material style strainer. And so if there's a lot of wax particles or bee's knees, etc., in that particular batch of honey, we can run it through our strainers, and it just takes those big particles out. These are not filters. We don't filter our honey. And so all the pollens and all the nutrients are left in our honey just because it's a very coarse filter only meant to pull chunks out. Some companies have these huge, massive filters that can even take the pollens out of honey. We don't even have the machinery to do that because the honey we sell is raw and unfiltered honey. So it still has all the nutrients, still has all the pollens, and it's not heated to a temperature that's really going to damage that honey. So that's pretty much it. So the honey sits here, and then again, it can be pumped into the extracting room the bottling room, to bottle the honey. Over here, we actually have a creamed honey machine. So this is a machine that we custom built several years ago in partnership with Cowan to make creamed honey. And so this makes about 2,000 pounds of creamed honey at a time. And so we actually take about 3 barrels of honey. We dump it all into this tank. And then we add in about 10% previously creamed honey, and that acts as a starter. And then there's a huge mixer in there, and it mixes the honey together. And there's also a chiller. And so this honey is being chilled and mixed all at the same time. And we'll leave it mixing and chilling for about 3 days. And then after about 3 days, it turns into that beautiful, white, smooth, spreadable creamed honey. A few super important things we've found when it comes to making creamed honey is that it needs to be, the starter that you use needs to be incredibly smooth. So the smoother the starter you use, the smoother the final product. And then I really recommend using a very, very light, mild tasting honey. So like a clover or a brush honey or alfalfa, something that's very light in color, very mild in taste. So a really dark, strong honey, it can turn into a smooth, spreadable honey, but we find that customers just really don't like a strong tasting, darker creamed honey. They expect kind of this light, mild, fluffy, that's kind of what a consumer imagines when they eat creamed honey. And so we find that having a light, mild honey works really, really well for making creamed honey. And then we can also mix flavorings in. So sometimes we'll make a cinnamon creamed honey, or different flavors of creamed honey, and so we can mix that in as well in the final stages of the process to make creamed honey. So creamed honey is a lot of fun, and that's a product we love to make. That's pretty much it as far as an overview of the facility. We've got more buildings in the back that are just full of honey or full of jars, and so we've got buildings that have a couple months worth of jars and honey stored up. Those aren't that interesting to see. And like I mentioned earlier, this used to be a combined facility for packing and beekeeping. We never really set out to do packing. I mean, it was kind of an accidental thing. I've always, I started out as a small scale beekeeper, then became a commercial beekeeper, and beekeeping was always my passion. And we'd always sold honey on the side. I'd always bottled by hand and sold to the local mom and pop grocery stores and health food stores, etc. But it was, beekeeping was always what we did. And then I guess it was about 7 years ago. You can probably go find it on YouTube somewhere. It'd be embarrassing to go back and watch, but it's out there somewhere. We got invited to be a part of a reality TV show 7 years ago, and it was called Billion Dollar Buyer. And the premise was Tillman Fertitta, who owns the Houston Rockets and Golden Nugget casinos, and he owns like 500 different restaurants, Saltgrass Steakhouse and Rainforest Cafe, and he started this TV show with CNBC and CBS, to where he's a billionaire, and so he would come out to these small businesses and tour their facility and help make whatever they make, and then you would have the chance to pitch him to carry your product or use your product in this whole empire of his. And so they called us and said, hey, we need a new honey supplier. We think you're a perfect fit. Would you want to be on the show? So we said, sure, it sounds like a fun experience. And so they did an episode on us. And so they filmed for like 3 days. And we went out and worked bees with this billionaire. And we extracted honey and bottled honey. And it was fun. I mean, it was a fun experience. And then we flew to his corporate headquarters in Houston, Texas, and then sat down in his boardroom and pitched him this deal of like, hey, we want to supply your entire chain empire with our honey. And I didn't really think we'd win anything. I mean, it's a reality TV show, right? It turns out we did. And so we won a deal to supply them with several 100,000 pounds of honey a year and supplying all of his restaurants. And they wanted to start in 3 months. And we were at that point packing everything by hand. I mean, we were like working bees during the day and packing honey in the evenings, and had no automated packing equipment, hand bottling everything. And so in 3 months we had to go out and had to get financing, buy a packing line, hire people to run the packing line, and we pulled it off. I mean, within 3 months we were supplying the Landry's empire with honey. And we said, look, if we've got all this investment already in packing honey, we may as well hire a sales guy and try to go after Walmart and H-E-B and other restaurant chains. And so we started doing that about 7 years ago, and it just kind of blew up into this whole additional business to supply a lot of different retailers and restaurants as well. And so it's been a nice cycle of life, in that we can produce the honey with our own commercial operation, package it and sell it. And so those are all kind of sister companies to the Bee Supply. And so I'd love to take you guys on a tour on different times of our beekeeping facilities. And so I plan to do that this January. I'll probably do a tour with you guys on our facilities in California. And then we've got facilities here in Texas and in North Dakota. And I'd like to work a few more of these tours in when it doesn't make sense to be out in the bee yard. So hopefully that's not disappointing. We didn't get to go out into the bees today, but hopefully it was entertaining to see a little bit of the inner workings of how we pack honey. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and I'd be more than happy to answer those at later on in the webinar. But for now, let's jump back in the webinar and talk about bees.
All right. So speaking of that, let's talk about bees. Let's talk about what is going on in the bees this month and what you need to be focused on as we get into beekeeping. All right. So December, there is, winter is here, and I'm going to say ish, because we're kind of getting this normal pattern of cool days and warmer days. And, I've talked to a lot of people all over the country that are, we've got days in the 60s and then the 40s and then back up in the 50s. And what that's resulting in for most areas is that there is little to no measurable nectar or pollen coming in. So natural nectar flows, natural pollen flows are pretty much over nationwide, except for, areas like southern Florida, places like that. Hive growth has also ended, so you could see some brood in your hive if you're more south, but very little hive growth is wrapped up. So this is something that you'll see, if you look at the 8 to 14 day forecast for the whole country, you can see that for the most part, most of the country is really warm or normal. And for years as a beekeeper, we would have warm winters, and I would think, "Oh, this is great! So cool. I want my bees to stay warm." That's not always actually a good thing because bees it's healthy for bees to shut down and go through a period of time where there isn't a lot of brood rearing going on. And when you have periods where, for weeks or months or an entire winter that are just warm, the bees are out flying needlessly, wearing themselves out, burning through their honey stores, and not really accomplishing anything in the meantime. So I'm really usually more excited about a average year that's maybe a little on the cooler side or just a normal winter. Again, this is just an 8 to 14 day forecast, so doesn't mean that the whole winter is going to be warm. But in general, I get a little nervous when we have a really long, extended warm winter. Really, as a beekeeper, what that means is you've got to pay closer attention to the food stores in your hive. Because again, when those bees are out foraging every day, they're going to be burning through their stores faster than normal. So you got to pay a little more attention to food than you would on most years. Inside December hives, when I'm looking at bees this time of year, I'm seeing very little brood. I'm seeing pictures like you see on the far right, maybe a little cluster of cap brood on some stronger hives, but for the most part, they're pretty much shut down. I'm seeing plenty of hives with no brood at all, no eggs, no larvae, and that's normal to see in October. As for feeding goals, if you're in the southern half of the US, I recommend maintaining 30 to 40 pounds of stores in your second box and 3 to 4 frames of honey in your bottom box. So if they're below that, I recommend feeding. If you're in the northern half of the US, your target is more like 50 to 60 pounds of stores in your second box and 3 to 4 frames of honey in your bottom box. If your hive has less than that and it's a deep box full of bees or more, you're going to need to feed using sugar bricks or other winter feeding methods. And I'll get into those in a minute. We talked about that quite a bit in November when we went out in the bee yard. I showed several methods for winter feeding, and I've got a slide to mention that in a minute. But just dumping liquid syrup in a hive when you've got daytime temperatures that are in the 50s, the bees just don't drink syrup very well. You've got to get a feed source that's a source of food that's right on top of the winter cluster, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Well, let's talk about that right now. So you've got to use some feeding method that gets that food right on top of the bees. And so you can see the two pictures on the right, a sugar brick or fondant or the Ziploc bag method for feeding syrup that just gets that food right on top of the winter cluster. And so that's really what I recommend for winter feeding. If you just dump it in a division door feeder or do an entrance feeder, the bees are going to have a hard time accessing it because it's just too cold for them to do that. So you can also give hives frames of honey from dead hives. So if you had a hive that died, then you could take some frames of honey from that dead hive and give it to a hungry hive. You would not want to put those frames of honey right in the middle of the brood nest. You would want to put it on the edge of the cluster. So if you can, if you open up your hive and you've got 4 frames covered with bees in the center, then you could put the frames of honey on that 5th and 6th frame. You wouldn't want to break that cluster apart and put those frames of honey in the very middle. You just want it to be on the outside edge of that cluster. Winter pollen substitute, it's not necessary. It's not absolutely necessary to feed pollen substitute in the winter months, but it doesn't hurt either. So, you want to just make sure that when you're placing a pollen patty in the hive, that it's not breaking up the cluster. So you want to make sure that the cluster between the 2 boxes of bees is intact. And so you just kind of want to put that pollen patty to one edge so that the bees can kind of cluster around it. Many beekeepers do stop feeding pollen substitute in December, but they'll often start again in mid-January to help boost the bees or give the bees a head start for rearing brood in the new year. So yeah, again, pollen substitute, it's not going to hurt anything in December, often not absolutely critical. January, February, some people do it again, and we'll talk more about that in January and February. Entrance reducers and screen bottom boards. So it is time for pretty much the whole nation to install entrance reducers if you haven't already. The rule of thumb I live by when it comes to entrance reducers is if the daytime temperature is typically or on average below 60 degrees, it's time to put on your entrance reducer. If you're consistently above 60 degrees during the day, then you really shouldn't add it just yet. But most of the country at this point, we're consistently below 60 degrees most days. And so it's time to get that on. If you're along the Gulf Coast or places like that, then yeah, you could wait a little bit longer. If you have screen bottom boards, you don't have to cover them. You can. The big key though is that cold wind doesn't blow up under the hive. And so that's the key, is that cold wind doesn't blow up under the hive. So you can just block the edges of your hive stand so that that doesn't happen. But otherwise, you can leave it exposed or you can cover it. December is also a good month to combine hives. So if you've got a bunch of weak bees, then weak beehives, then December is a good time to combine. If your hive looks like this picture, I hope it doesn't, but if it does, then it's probably not going to make it through the winter. If you just got a small cluster of bees, that maybe only add up to a couple frames covered in bees, odds are they are not going to make it through the winter, and it's best to just combine it with another hive. You can, and I talked about this in the it was either the November or the October webinar. I think it was the October webinar that I talked about overwintering in a 5-frame nook. And so you can take these smaller hives and overwinter in a 5-frame nook, and they stay a little bit warmer in a smaller box. It does need to be a wooden nook box if you do that. But again, unless your hive is at least 2 or 3 frames of bees, I wouldn't even bother. So it's got to be at least 2 or 3 frames covered in bees to even justify putting it in a nook box. Otherwise, it's best to just combine it with another hive. But when you're trying to decide, do I combine this hive or not, then make sure you're checking the strength of that hive when the daytime temperature is like 50 to 60 degrees. If you go out and check your hive when it's 30 degrees, they're going to be clustered so tightly, it's going to be hard to get an accurate count of the frames of bees in your hive. It might look like it's only 3 frames of bees, but they're clustered so tight they may actually be 6 or 7 frames of bees. So go out there on a warm, sunny afternoon and take a look at your bees when you're trying to decide if you should combine and base it on the strength at those times. And again, you're counting the frames of bees in all the boxes. So all the boxes combined, if you're 2 or 3 frames or below, then it's a good idea to go ahead and combine them. As far as methods for combining, you can just take the weak hive and add it directly to a stronger hive. You can take the lid off of a stronger hive, and then just add this box of weaker bees right on top of it. just make sure that that weak hive didn't have a varroa mite issue. So make sure it's not overloaded with varroa mites, because you don't want to give those varroa mites to your stronger hive. Some people put a sheet of newspaper between the two hives, and that works well. That's a little more preferable than the bees chew through that newspaper and combine together over a couple of day period. And that it tends to lessen the fighting. But in the fall and winter, I don't see a lot of fighting anyway. And so I tend to just put the boxes together. I do like to kill the queen in the weaker hive because something's up with that hive, thus they're weaker. And I'd rather not let that weak queen potentially kill the queen in my stronger hive, because obviously it's an inferior queen in the weak hive. So I kill the queen in the weaker hive if I can find her, and that way my stronger queen prevails. You can also, sometimes what I also do instead of combining the boxes together when it's fall or winter is I'll just take those frames of bees in the weaker hive and I'll just shake those frames of bees directly into the hive, a stronger hive. And that tends to work well. Again, in the fall and winter, I don't typically see a whole lot of fighting. If I'm doing a combination in the spring, yeah, okay, that's where that sheet of newspaper can come in handy a little bit more. But in the fall or winter, it's cold, they're clustering. There just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of fighting. So dealing with dead outs, this is the most discouraging time of year for beekeeping. I mean, and I see it all over social media. We have people call in and talk to us about it all the time. It's just discouraging because, their bees are dying this time of year. This is when we have the greatest losses because it's not that something's wrong with our bees right now. It's often more that something happened to our bees in the summer, and we're just now seeing the results of that. And once you get a couple of cold fronts come in, we tend to see those weak hives start to die. 9 times out of 10, varroa mites and viruses are the culprit. And if you had a high varroa mite level in the spring, I'm sorry, in the summer or early fall, even if you treated for varroa mites, those viruses can linger up to 6 months. And so you can see hives die 6 months after the varroa mite levels got high. And that's why we preach so hard that keep your varroa mite levels low, be proactive when it comes to dealing with varroa mites. Because again, those varroa mite levels getting high can really damage your hive in the long term. So um so you want to pick up the dead hives quickly to avoid pest damage. You don't want the wax moths or small hive beetles or mice or anything else eating that honeycomb. That honeycomb is super valuable. So pick up those dead outs. The honey and pollen in those dead outs can be used in splits next year. So store it and you can absolutely reuse it next year. And don't give up. Losses are so common, and that comb with a drawn out comb or comb with honey and pollen will give next year's hive a tremendous, tremendous jump start. So that's super, super helpful. So um, so I am seeing a handful of folks in the chat saying that the audio is pretty choppy. And so I apologize for that. It's the symptom of streaming from the back of a truck. So what I'm going to do, James and Sherry, if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and do the you guys' presentation. And then if my audio is better, then I can come in when you guys finish and wrap up my portion. But I'm almost done anyway. And so you guys, James and Sherry, if you guys want to take over, and then if my audio is better, I'll wrap us up at the end with the few slides I've got left here.
Let's do that. Let's do that because it's getting a little bit worse and it might be the time of day of where you are, because I think you're a couple hours earlier than us. And it's kind of a disappointment. James is here. Wave your hand. Wave your hand. but he's not going to join us tonight. He's going to make me do the presentation because let's all feel some sympathy for him. He got 2 big fat injections in his back this morning at 5 a.m. and he's going to milk it for all he can get out of it.
Oh,
Hear it? You hear it? So anyway, y'all got me, but I'm going to share my screen here. Yes, I do want to continue, show all my windows. Come down here and I'm going to grab that one. And let's get started from the beginning. Oops, hold on. Hold on. Don't y'all just love it? Love it, love it, love it.
We can see your screen, Chari.
From the beginning. All right, what? Can you see it? Can you see it? Yeah, we're good. All right, I'm good. All right, so, oh, honey. And this is perfect topic for kind of following up what Blake just did with the tour of DCH. I don't know about y'all, but that's super cool. James and I have been there before, but just seeing his little tour, oh my gosh, that was awesome. Makes me want to go back. Doesn't make you want to go. I think that we should all show up one day and make Blake give us a tour again, right? All right, so let's talk about a few things, some of which Blake covered, but mine's going to be a little different. Crystallization of honey. Is it bad? How it happens, how to prevent it, how to remedy it, and how to make money from it, which is kind of a little bit where Blake went with the creamed honey. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. All right, there we go. All right, let's talk about the states of honey. Liquid, we all know about that. Comb honey, crystallized, creamed, whipped, and spun. All of those are the same. Crystallized, creamed, whipped, and spun. Does that mean this is bad when it's crystallized? Of course not. It's not bad. We just try to make money off of it, or we liquefy it again in order that we can just do it like liquid honey, right? So that is the state of honey in all of its state. These are all the same, kind of like what Blake was talking about. All right, let me move this thing out of my way. Whoops, sorry. Well, come on, work with me. All right, why does honey crystallize? Raw honey will crystallize. I put this on here because it was a lot and I couldn't remember all of it and I wanted you to know it. So raw honey will crystallize because the natural sugars in honey, glucose and fructose, I think most of us know that, will bind together and begin to form little crystals. Once the crystals form, they'll continue to build on each other and the small pollen particles and beeswax that are left in raw honey. Raw honey is nothing been done to it, just like Blake was talking about earlier. It's not been superheated like the little honey drop up there that says. It's not been pasteurized is another way of saying it, okay? The time it will take the honey to crystallize depends mostly on the ratio of fructose and glucose. Honey higher in glucose and lower in fructose will crystallize faster than the reverse, which is interesting. And that means that the rate is going to be completely different depending on what the bees forage on. And I think that most of us that have been beekeepers for a while can attest to that. There's over 300 different types of honey, and they all crystallize at different rates. One that is awful is cotton honey, good honey, but it crystallizes. You can watch it do it in front of your face. So that is what is causing the crystallization. And as long as we leave it raw, that's going to happen. But our customers like that. Customers see with their eyes, so we have to kind of keep it buy with their eyes. They want it liquid. But anyway, keeping honey liquid. The hive temperature seems to work well for the bees, right? Now we have seen honey. I don't know what time of year. June. I think it was when we were right before it can happen.
Anytime, really.
It really anytime, but we were having that conversation at extraction time about crystallization very often, but it can. Any hot box, and I put this picture, y'all have seen this if you watched this program, we've done it a year or two ago. James leftover parts, it worked beautifully, had nothing but light bulbs in it. You can use just about anything that's a closed environment, old freezer, chest type freezer, even an ice box would work just for the light bulbs. The light bulbs put off a liquid, honey liquid for longer. Warming tanks are wonderful for short term. If you could see right here beside my desk, we have a warming tank, a stainless warming tank that works great, but we're constantly feeding it honey. I wouldn't want to leave it in there for a long period of time, but it only warms it to what, like 98, 94, 95, 105. So we wouldn't want to do that for a long time, but you know, for a short period of time, it works. I'm sorry. It's on a timer. That's why. And the floor is cold. So if you got a carpeted space in your house, I'm talking smaller amounts, of course, you folks something a little more like Blake's got at his facility, but keeping it on carpet works well. That keeps it off the cold floor. And so forth. And sell quickly. We made a huge mistake. I want to year out of them, but year 2, I was so proud, and we bought, I don't know, 200 or 300 like they were gorgeous. It was before this pretty little honey box, warming box. And within about family and some friends, they were all pretty much weights that you could have used for fishing weights because they were rock solid. And they were in these little plastic jars, and there was we could do about. So boxes, or don't bottle them in advance, which is what we ultimately do. We very, very well. No, we're not, and James said that we're not serving children fertitas. Rockets. No, we're not. I put this here on social media, I don't know, a week or so, not even a week ago, a few days ago, this came up, and I was watching as people got into the conversation because I wrote an article several years ago. Wrong that you cannot do this. But a friend of ours and a very honeybee lab at A&M, he's very, very believable, wrote this on that post. He put as explained to me by my father-in-law, a PhD in nuclear physics. This is a matter of physics, as building crystal requires molecules to move around to form the crystals. At freezing temperature, the molecules almost totally stop their movement, and consequently crystallization is halted. I want so bad to go told you. Right. Cold, really cold, like frozen. It doesn't freeze, cold fudge, but it does slow crystallization. I mean, I've read and I researched it for you today. Folks say 6 months. You can do this. So this, and don't judge us on how. As a matter of fact, I covered it up with the this little voice talking here on the bottom right. Is that the Fury freezer wasn't that clean because it was dedicated to frames of honey, but we could fit. I had notes here. We could fit that had 96 frames in it, and it worked beautifully. It worked beautifully for a long, long time. What,
Steve?
Oh, Steve, we have a question.
No, he said a statement. Chari.
Oh, was it there? even turn crystallized bottles to liquid. Did you hear that? About, I knew some of that. Very good. Very good. I love that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Steve. If ice crystals, I'll put this bullet on here so I wouldn't forget to tell you, if ice crystals have formed on the frames, take precaution when thawing. So those that we did this many, many years, but when you pull these out, if there's ice forming, because you can tell our freezer wasn't self-defrosting there, if ice crystals form on those frames, it will be a problem if you don't get that off before you thaw that. If you don't thaw it properly, it'll raise the moisture. It will. It'll come out. It'll come out wet. So I have a note here to read to you. So there was a couple of people that had suggestions with that. Joe Long, and this is social media posting. Here's my advice: put the frozen frames in hive boxes. So put them back in the boxes, stand them sideways, in other words, on their end, on clean, accommodating trays to collect oozing honey. So very true, because it will ooze out when it starts to thaw. A clean area with a dehumidifier set to 40% or below. Arrange frames so a fan can blow air across the surface. Moisture is your enemy when thawing frozen honey, and in a couple of days, frames are ready for extracting. Warmer temperatures help as well. He said, I have a 20 cubic foot freezer, can store up to 300 pounds, like we did here. That's very good advice, blowing a fan across the frames to get that frost off and keeping it with a dehumidifier in the room.
Yeah, it is. And, and it
I thought you weren't
well, I'm
talking.
not hiding.
Talk
But
loud enough.
frozen honey still drips.
It does.
She said-
It does. Sludge.
Well, I don't know if you call it sludge or
I-
not, but you call it sludge. I
Yeah.
call it frozen honey.
Frozen honey.
Anyway, it still drips.
It does. Types of honey can matter. Lynn Jones, our favorite Lynn Jones, said yes and no. Typically, storing liquid honey in freezer will pause crystallization, and I think that kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier. That some said 8 months, 6 months. Then she said, I have found that cotton nectar honey will sometimes still crystallize in the deep freezer. I'm not surprised. If it is still liquid, when I take it out of the freezer, it seems to make up for lost time and will be solid within a few days. That cracked me up because it's true. It's true. All right. So now liquefying. Slow and steady wins the race. And that's truly, for small scale beekeepers, how we do it. So hot water bath, my least favorite. I tried doing one of James's, the one that sits on top of our breakfast table the other day. I don't have the patience. So slow bursts in a microwave. It's a glass container, rotate it frequently. I do like 10 seconds and then turn the jar, not shake it. Don't shake it. It puts a bunch of foam on it. But just do it, 10 seconds a few times and it works pretty well. Double boiler for larger quantities, but that's kind of a pain as well. But it works. It works, and we did it for a few years when we were kind of starting and got more than a little bit of honey, but it worked. You know what a double boiler is: big pot, smaller pot, water underneath. But I got something for you: a bucket heater for a 5-gallon bucket. It works great. It totally works great. I couldn't help but put this great review. Someone, what's the guy's name? Craig. See, it's covered up on mine. Craig T. He bought one of these. They are super. You just put this band, plug it in, and put it around a 5-gallon bucket, which is what we store our honey in. And I will tell you, move it up and down over the course of that 24 hours because it's that heat. You can see where that heat is centralized to. So we would move it up and down and stir it periodically, and it works great. It works great. I got another one for you. This is super cool. Now, I saw this in that post that I was talking about the other day. This is called sous vide. And James and I were talking a week ago. We were talking about this. It's French, and I can't speak French when we were in France. Can you believe that? No. Sous vide. It's this tool you see on the left, and it goes down. It's a I'm gonna call it a temperature specific. You can set it on a temperature, and it warms water. It's just for water around food in a baggie. That's what people use it for, is cooking food in Ziploc bags, vacuum sealed. I think that's what the word means. Sous vide means vacuum sealed.
Does it?
It does. I looked that up. So that I'm not making that up. If I'm wrong, then
That's not
I made it up.
hard, but anyway.
Anyway, I really did read that. I think that's correct. Anyway, so this guy's name's B-Boy Bill, has a video, and I don't laugh at him. I liked it. I liked his name. Anyway, he took an ice chest and put water in. You see the top right picture, put water in it, set his 5-gallon bucket of rock hard honey, and that's him knocking on it, bottom left picture. And within 24 hours, it had liquefied. He set it to 110 degrees and 24-ish. He forgot to set the timer, I think he said. Later, it was liquefied. And I think that's pretty darn cool.
Clayton says it's an immersion heater.
Immersion heater. Thank you,
Correct.
Clayton. It's an immersion heater. See, we learn stuff every day. I put this little bubble down here to remind me to tell you. So B-Boy Bill, sorry.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill. Hey, I like your photos. I liked your video too, or I wouldn't be using it. But once that honey is heated, it foamed on him. And so he got a strainer and a spoon. That's not how I would do it. Saran wrap works. Saran wrap is your friend. Get a piece of saran wrap, pull it out as big as the top of the 5-gallon bucket. How many times have we done this? And you put it down inside, push it down to the edges really good. Get your fingers, kind of do it all around the edges. And then of course, have a container, because you're fixing to take out the sludge. I'll call that again, use that word again. And you just grab the middle of that, because it's not going to get you messy because you're touching saran wrap. Grab it, pull it up really fast, one move, and put it in a bowl. Every bit of that sludge is gone. That quick. Works beautifully. Anyway, I digress. Sous vide. I think it's a cool tool. And, they're relatively inexpensive. So give it a try. Now here's make money out of the crystallized honey. And I think that this is just to make fun of what's going to happen anyway. But like Blake's awesome facility, there's real money into good creamed honey. And his obviously is very good. This is one of the flavors Desert Creek does. It's pumpkin spice, totally popular at a certain time of year that we just did. The quality of granulated honey is directly influenced by the size of the crystals. And I'm going to really briefly go through that because he talked about that. You really have to have a good seed, and not to take any business away from Blake, because I don't think we could. But if you were to buy that beautiful white creamed honey of his, perfect seed. All right. If you want to start with your own crystallized honey, then these are the three, the time lapse of it. It's going to start off looking like that on the left, probably darker even. In 15 minutes of using a mortar and pestle, it's going to get a little bit lighter. What you're doing is you're crushing those crystals down, and you're literally just crushing them to the smallest little thing that can possibly be, because that's what makes it so nice and smooth and white. I put the little not recommended to emulsify, because what ends up happening, I saw a contradiction of this. It does. It puts oxygen and moisture into the mix. We have personally seen some people do this with an emulsifier and a blender and a rocket thing, and it works. I would keep the lid on it, but it's really not the ideal. You should use something that's not, if you're making it from scratch. Otherwise, buy Blake's honey and use it as seed.
You know what that is? That's ice cream.
It looks like ice cream.
No, I'm saying it's made of milk and
Oh.
to create ice cream. Ice cream's better than the milk.
Okay. Mix 1 part seed to 10 parts honey, liquid honey, 1 to 10. That is, now if Blake said differently, then I apologize, but I couldn't hear because I was typing. Okay. But that's the recipe we've used, and that's the recipe pretty standard online. Mix thoroughly, but not vigorously. In other words, not getting air into it. Some suggest refrigerating. We've done that. But you can just let it sit for a couple of weeks and it works about as well and as quickly. Results are creamed honey, whipped honey, or even spun honey. It's all called the same thing, right? It's all whatever your magic word you want to make the most out of it that you can get. Pick that up and adopt it, and it'll be beautiful. Look how white that is. But that's because it's good seed, right? It's good seed. All right, storing the creamed honey, think about it. It's crystallized honey. Remember, it's all in the same category. If it gets warm, what's going to happen? You're right. Whoever said that, it's going to melt back down.
Steve.
I don't know who said it. I met multiple people. Don't keep it in a garage unless it's really cool. Because we store a lot in the summer in the garage because it's warm. But if you don't, for liquid honey, I mean, but if you're not wanting it to reliquify, keep it in a nice cool spot because it will remelt and then you just have to start all over. And it doesn't really melt the same. It has a different consistency. Look, I'm done. Back to you, Blake. Are you ready? I hope you're ready. Is Blake with us? Oh, you know what? I don't know that Blake. There he is. There he is. Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You can.
I can.
Okay. All right. So I tried dialing in with my phone, and hopefully that's better audio than what we had before. So does
Okay.
it still sound okay?
It does. I'm gonna remove my spotlight because that was just too much of me going on out there.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So a couple things on that, Sherry. So I loved what you presented, and that immersion heater. We should totally find that and carry that so that it's easier for folks to find, because I love that. So
I agree.
let's get with Brian and see if we can carry that
Okay,
immersion
already
heater,
on the
because
list.
I love that. I love that. And then yeah, we should also do a video, Sherry, on your saran wrap foam removal system. So I love that. We should do a quick video so that folks can see how to do that method. But I love that too, for removing foam from honey. So super cool. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so let's jump back, and I don't know where my video went, but you probably couldn't see me well anyway. I look like a kid in a tent with a flashlight on my face because it's totally dark now here, and the only light I have in this truck is the computer screen. So you're not missing a whole lot anyway, not seeing my face. So couple more slides here just to
We
wrap
can
up
see your
on.
face, Blake. I can see
Oh,
your
you
face.
can see my face.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
well, I
don't do
can't see my
anything.
face. So okay, well, I can't see it, so all good. So a couple quick things as we kind of wrap up the practical bee stuff. When to remove boxes. So if you've got extra boxes on your hives that the bees are not populating, then the winter months are a good time to remove those. So here, my general rule of thumb is if I have a box that has less than 25% full of bees, and I have other boxes with plenty of honey in them, then I go ahead and remove that upper box. So if I've got 3 or 4 or 5 boxes on a hive, the bees do not need all that room over the winter, and so I'm just going to take the top 1 or 2 off as long as they're not full of bees. Boxes that are full of bees, I'm going to leave them in place. But empty boxes or boxes with no bees in them, you really don't have to leave them on over the course of the winter. If you are in the south, then again, picking up your dead outs is very important, because wax moths can be a problem in the fall or early winter. Once we start getting freezes at night, wax moths aren't really a problem. But as you're picking up your dead out hives, you're probably going to see some wax moth damage that was left over from perhaps earlier in the year. And so wax moth damage like these pictures, I'm not at all concerned about. I will absolutely reuse these frames. The bees next year will easily clean these frames right up. They'll pull that webbing out of the frames, and these are still perfectly usable. You can leave them outside and let them freeze. A freeze will kill wax moths or wax moth larvae. You can throw these frames in your freezer if you don't have a natural freeze coming up, just to kill everything. But these are frames that you can absolutely reuse. Again, the picture on the left, you can reuse. If you're seeing a picture on what you see on the right, this is a really, really bad sign. really anytime you are seeing a lot of debris on the front of your hive, that's cause for concern. It means that your hive is being robbed, and those robber bees are uncapping cells of honey, and those uncapped cells are getting thrown onto the entrance. Or in this case, this hive had just severe wax moth damage, and the particles were landing on the bottom board. But you don't really ever want to see a lot of debris on the front of your hive. If your hive is strong and healthy, they're going to keep the inside and the entrance of that hive completely clean, and that's what you want to see. If you have frames like these, they are trash. These are frames that if the wax moth damage is this severe, I'm just going to throw these frames away. This is where it's important to pick up those dead out hives quickly so that the wax moth can't gain a foothold in those hives. So pick up your dead out equipment before it gets to this stage. But if it does get to this stage, then yeah, I mean, you could scrape all that wax off of that foundation, recoat that foundation with beeswax, and try to save that frame. But honestly, for $3-4 for a frame, it's just not worth it. And the odds that the bees are going to successfully draw that comb out the right way next is slim. So yeah, so I would really recommend throwing those frames away. If you have live wax moth larvae, chickens absolutely love them. So give them to your chickens. They will go crazy over the wax moth larvae. They'll clean it all right up. What is it normal to see in December? And I threw this slide in just because we've had a lot of folks asking recently, hey, I'm going through my hive and I don't see any eggs. I don't see any larvae. I'm really concerned. Is my hive queenless? And my answer to them is no, your hive is fine. It's super common this time of year to see zero brood, or just brood on a couple frames, like you see little patches of brood, like you see in this picture. But if you're seeing no brood, no eggs, no larvae in your hives, don't panic. That's normal this time of year. 0 to minimal pollen stores is also fairly common. It's pretty normal to see the bees having burned through all their pollen stores this time of year. When there's no natural pollen coming in, no brood being reared, that's not uncommon. You'll see greatly slowed pollen patty and syrup consumption. So they're not going to be eating as quickly because they're clustered and they're not moving around the hive as much, and eating isn't a super high priority for them. You'll also see swings in visible population based on temperature. You might go in when it's 40 degrees and sunny and you're like, oh my goodness, where are all my bees? And then you'll go back out when it's 65 and sunny. And it's like, oh, my hive grew. And it's really just the hive shrinking or growing based on temperature. And so that's all very common, which leads us to the question of when is it okay to look at my bees in the winter months? Here's my opinion. This is a little chart I put together, and it's if you're looking at your bees less than a minute and you're not pulling frames out, just above freezing is okay. You know, I've worked bees plenty of times when it's 31, 32, 33 degrees. If it's sunny outside, even if it's not, if you're just breaking the boxes apart and quickly looking at them, or quickly opening the lid to take a peek, it's not going to hurt anything. Just be in and out in less than a minute. If you're looking for more than a minute, or you're pulling out maybe a frame, then just sunny and above 40 degrees. If you're pulling out several frames, you want it to be sunny and above 50 degrees. I highly recommend looking at bees during the heat of the day, several hours before dark, and this allows the hive plenty of time to recluster and reform, rather than, if you look at them right before dark, any bees that fell out of the hive, or if you broke the cluster apart, they don't have a lot of time to reform. So just look in the middle of the day, so they've got plenty of time before it gets cold and dark again to recluster. I always recommend, if it's better to look at your bees than not. You're not going to hurt them taking a quick peek in the cold. make sure they aren't starving, check on the population. Starvation will hurt bees way more than taking a quick peek in the cold. They can handle the cold quite well in those cases. The winter months are also a great time to rotate old comb out of your hives. I had a video on this in last month's monthly buzz, so go back and check that November one out, where I did a video on how to rotate comb. But most people recommend every 5 to 10 years, rotating out the oldest comb. This is easiest to do in the winter because a lot of frames become empty in the winter, whether it's because the hive died or it's just, they're eating through their winter stores, and you might end up with some frames that are totally empty. So if you're going through your hive in late winter, let's say, and you've got some old, dark, nasty frames and the bees have eaten all the honey out of it and it's empty, you can go ahead and pull those out and replace them with a newer frame. And it's a great time to just always be rotating frames out of your bees. You will also start to see cleansing flights, and this is really common, especially in colder climates when maybe you've had 1 or 2 weeks that the weather's really cold and the bees have not been able to come out and fly at all. And then suddenly you've got a bright, warm, sunny day and it's 55 degrees. The bees will come pouring out of the hive and they will be going to the bathroom. They haven't gone to the bathroom in a few weeks and they're eager to go. And so on these sudden, warm, sunny days, you'll see this burst of activity as bees are coming out of the hive. If you start to see on those warm days all these little brown or yellow speckles on your white cars, that's what's going on. When I first started beekeeping, my first couple of years, my parents were always asking. I was a young teenager at the time when I started beekeeping, and every warm winter day, my parents' cars would get covered in these little speckles, and they were like, "What on earth is causing all these annoying and difficult to scrub off little speckles on the cars?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know." I knew it was my bees, but I didn't tell them that for several years. But yes, so the bees will come out, go on a cleansing flight, which is a really nice way of saying they've got to go to the bathroom. And you'll start to see that on warm, sunny days. You'll also, on those warm, sunny days, see them looking for anything that even sort of resembles pollen. And so they will be getting into your neighbor's chicken feed. They'll be going after sawdust, anything that is powdery. They are going to go after it thinking that it's maybe pollen. They're just desperate to forage on anything. And that can really cause problems with your neighbors, because if your neighbors have chickens or a workshop or animal feed, the bees are going to be all over it, trying to dig any dust out of it. It doesn't really have any nutritional value for the bees, but they will be all over it. What I do to combat that is I feed open pollen substitute. Works really well when there's no natural pollen flow available, and it can help discourage the bees from being a nuisance. So what I do is I just get pollen powder. So we sell this in 50-pound bags or 1-pound bags, and it's the same stuff you use to make pollen patties. It just hasn't had the syrup mixed in with it. So it's a dry powder, and you can open feed that. And so my favorite thing is to get a Pro Nook box, like you see in the center picture there. And I just, that yellow entrance grid on the front of it, you can completely remove that entrance grid, and you can put a couple pounds of pollen substitute inside the Nook box and then go put it somewhere up high in a tree where raccoons and possums can't get to it. And those bees will just forage like crazy all over that pollen substitute powder on those warm winter days. And that's good for the bees. The pollen powder is actually useful for the bees and will help them start growing a bit. It's not critical. You don't have to do it, but it's good for them, and it'll distract them from whatever's going on over at your neighbors. So James and Chari saved me and already did their thing. So that wraps up this webinar. So as always, we'll send a recording out for those of you that stuck with us through the whole webinar. I appreciate it. I know the audio is a little choppy there. The recording that we email out should be much better quality. So you can rewatch that recording if the audio is too choppy in some places. And I will do my best to minimize presenting from the back seat of a pickup truck in the future. So thanks for sticking with us.
And then this should say we'll see you in January. I forgot to edit it, but yeah, we'll see you in the new year. In January, we really start jumping back into bee season, and it's hard to believe, but things actually start happening again in January, especially in February. So we'll jump back into bee season, and I cannot wait to see you there. If you've got any final questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we'll keep answering those. Otherwise, I will see you in a month. Have a great Christmas, everybody.